Green Valley, Arizona. Just 20 miles south of Tucson, was built for retired Americans who have come to enjoy the rest of their life in a dry, sunny climate. Right on the edge of Green Valley is a retired nuclear missile silo. In 1985, the SALT II Treaty was passed to rid the world of nuclear missile sites. Of 54 Titan missile silos in America, only this one was saved from demolition after mandatory steps were taken to render it harmless. This is a tour of not only one of America's best-kept secrets, but an insight into what was once part of the most terrifying global threats in modern history.
The primary security for the area didn't come from that chain link fence you see surrounding us. That was fine for keeping out some of the neighborhood children and wayward coyotes. The primary security came from these TPSYs. Now that's an acronym for Territorial Protection System. And that's these horns you will see surrounding the silo. One is a sender unit, the other is a receiver unit. It worked on an early application of Doppler radar. Very, very sensitive. As a matter of fact, I don't think they knew too much about what they were doing with it when it first came online because it was so sensitive, it was even picking up birds flying through it. They later had to reconfigure this system to pick up something 35 pounds or more. That way they got a little bit more sleep at night and were still able to maintain their security. Follow me for a few more feet. Now the missile is steered to its target. When these bells move, they could move 6 degrees in any direction, and they're moved by these hydraulic cylinders right here, based, of course, on commands from the computer on board the guidance section on stage 2 of the missile. When these two fuels come together in a combustion chamber, they ignite by what's known as hypergolic action. What that means is that there's no ignition system required whatsoever, like the spark plugs in a car. It's instant inferno. These are the hydrazine lines, and these are the oxidizer lines. Aren't you glad you don't have fuel lines on your car like that? I had a gentleman a couple of months ago in tour said he thought his wife's car did. At any rate, something very important under my left hand. It's a butterfly valve lock. It's there deliberately to avoid an inadvertent launch of the missile. Many people are aware of the fact that only the President of the United States has the authority to use anything with nuclear capability. You may have seen him on occasion on television. There might have been a uniformed gentleman standing in back of him with a black briefcase that's manacled to his wrist. That's known as the football. In that football are codes. If necessary at that particular point in time, the president needed to use nuclear capability, he would take a code out of that case and hand it down through the chain of command, ultimately possibly to a site like this when it was an active site. And that code would be entered into the computer during the launch process, and that's the only way that this valve will open. And my partner, when he goes through a simulated launch downstairs, will tell you more about that. Follow me for a few more steps. On your right is the Mark VI reentry vehicle. It contained a single nuclear warhead. More modern weapon systems you may know use multiple warheads. However, the single warhead used in this system was one of the most powerful nuclear devices this country ever had in its arsenal. In general terms, if it detonated right here, Tucson would cease to exist. Cars and other electrical devices as far away as Los Angeles, California would stop operating completely due to magnetic radiation, and it had more power than all of the conventional bombs dropped on all of Europe and all of Japan in the entire Second World War. It would not be a nice day. On your right is the next fuel hard stand. I call it fuel, it's not. It's an oxidizer. But the name of this fuel is nitrogen tetroxide. Now you can't use water to wash a fuel spill down here. If you did, water and nitrogen tetroxide make nitric acid. Bad news. There is an original example of that specialized refrigerated tanker truck that would bring the nitrogen tetroxide to the site, and once again you can see how they hook it to the pipes for gravity feeding into the missile below. Now I'm going to take you to the silo. Follow me to the silo. I'm proud to present Titan II. What you're looking at is like looking at a 10-story building underground. There are 9 operating levels to it for maintenance purposes. As you can see, the work platforms for the levels in a raised position around the outside of the silo. They're tan in color. Also around the outside of the silo, you can see silver gray panels. They're 4 foot by 8 foot by 1 foot thick, and they're made of spun aluminum, and they are sound attenuator panels. If it was necessary to launch the missile, the noise and vibration would be so bad that it would destroy itself and the silo before it got out of there. Now, if you bring your eyes all the way up to the top of the missile itself in the reentry vehicle, you'll see a square cutout. That is where the nuclear device was removed. In addition to that, it was necessary to take the missile out of the silo, drill holes on one side of it, lay it on the ground out here for 30 days so the orbiting satellites could in fact view that this is a disarmed missile and one of the main reasons we can be a museum today. Now I'd like to take you over and show you that door and tell you about it. Follow me, please. You're now standing by the side of the giant silo closure door. It's a huge, primarily steel structure weighing about 740 tons. It rides on railroad tracks and it's pulled open and closed by large steel cable on hydraulically actuated drums. The door could open from fully closed to fully open in from 17 to 21 seconds only. It must have opened fast because you can see they built large shock absorbers out into the leading edge of the door where it apparently slammed pretty hard into its tan stops out there. As you can see now, we've added 6 large concrete gray blocks out there to ensure that this door can't open any further than it is. You can't launch a missile from a silo with the door only half open, and another reason we can be a museum today. This is a retaliatory weapon, and we would not use this weapon unless we had been fired upon first. That's why it's been shaped like that, a little bit out at the leading edge, a little bit like a cowcatcher on a locomotive, a little bit like a plow. If there was any bomb debris in an area, that shape lends itself very well for plowing the debris out of the way. If there were people working on topside, and if there was any problems, they needed to be warned also. So out to your left, you'll see a pole out there with 3 lights on it, just like traffic lights, red, amber, and green. If the green light was on, everything was okay. If the amber light was on, it was caution. But if the red light came on, big trouble. That's when that horn would go off. People working up on the top, they could not go back downstairs. Feet don't fail me now. Get me out of here in a hurry. When you consider the nuclear warhead that was on top of that missile downstairs and the fact that the missile itself was easy to damage, security for entering these sites was extremely tight. The security began where you came into the Missile Museum building. You saw a steel gate. At that gate was the first of 4 phone calls they would have to make before they finally got all the way downstairs, and there were no keys. All doors were electrically opened. For security reasons, they only had 3 minutes to get from that first phone out at that gate to the second phone they would encounter at the bottom of this first set of stairs. Anything more than 3 minutes, the commander downstairs will not electrically open the door into the entrapment area where further security procedures take place and where we're going next. Okay, the doors that you've just come through are the entrapment area. It can only be opened electrically by the commander downstairs. Okay, when they got in here, the commander had to pick up that phone at the top of the stairs where John is for his 3rd phone call and issue a top secret access code that changed every day. And we're also told that no one without proper authority ever got past this 2nd door. Also, in addition to that, above my left hand, you'll see a closed circuit television camera that is still alive today, as you will see. And the commander downstairs could see everybody that was in this entrapment area. And these crews were quite well known to each other because they made every effort to keep these crews together for as long as possible. So follow me on down. Please hold on to the railing on your right. Okay, the stairway structure was only built to high-quality industrial standards and probably would not survive a near miss outside, so the Air Force called it the soft area. But from where I'm standing on it, it's an entirely different story. As you pass through, you'll see at a bare minimum the walls are approximately 4 feet thick, reinforced concrete. Okay, when the crew got down this far, of course, they would not find any of these blast lock doors open. There's 2 of them here, and this is where they would make their 4th and final phone call from the box at the left and say, I'm at blast lock door 6. So the commander inside and someone out here simultaneously would push a button on the consoles, and that would hydraulically withdraw these large bank-style vault pins from the door, and then usually the lowest ranking member of the crew got to pull the door open, because you know they're pretty heavy. Only after the door closed and it hit this micro switch and they came inside and pushed the button to withdraw the pins in the door, making a switch at the top, only then would the power be transferred to the other blast lock door. When this was an active site, it was not possible to have both of these blast lock doors open at the same time, of course, for crew protection. You're now down 35 feet below ground, and you've come down 55 steps. Follow me into the blast lock area. At this point on the tour, I see a young lady with a gray hat on. It says volunteer on there. You didn't know that, did you? Would you like to help this young man open this door for us here? Grab a hold of that handle. Go ahead, both of you. And then give a good strong pull. There you go, great. All right, don't lock us in. Now you get to push it back again. All right.
Watch your fingers.
These 2 youngsters, that's great, thank you very much. These 2 youngsters have just moved a blast lock door weighing 6,643 pounds. Whoa. And for the weight of it, you saw how relatively easy it was to move. That door's been hanging there for more than 32 years. It's less than a quarter of an inch off the floor, and it hasn't sagged enough in all that time to get anywhere near scratching the floor. That's a testament to the engineering construction that went into this site. In addition to that, everything from here on in that's launch sensitive is shock isolated. If you look over to your left shoulder, you'll see what looks like sloppy wiring. It is not. It's deliberately built that way in case the ground outside was moving around, it would maintain its contact. In addition to that, over those same panels, you'll see steel cylinders. Inside those cylinders are springs, acting as shock absorbers for the equipment. From here on in, you're going to see an awful lot of that kind of construction. In addition to that, the lights are on springs, and the emergency lights are on springs.
Nothing more than a steel tunnel, 9.5 feet diameter, half-inch thick. No concrete on the outside, simply buried under 35 feet of dirt. This entire cableway will bounce around, move, depending on outside shock sources. The silo walls are 8 feet thick from the top down to the 40-foot level, and then tapers to 4 feet at the bottom. Now this is the only entrance into the silo. We would have to come in this way and then take an elevator or use ladders to get to other levels of the silo. Now what we have out here are a couple of the work platforms. Now the normal operating procedure, if they were going to work at a particular level, they would come over here and press these buttons, lowering all the platforms. Then when they get them all lit up here, they press this button, they all would go down. So they go out there and they shut the door and nobody knows they're out there. So they have to put this high-tech sign on here, telling everybody keep their pinkies off the buttons. Those platforms know only two positions, up and down. If you're standing on them, it's going up. You have two choices. You become a Belgian waffle, or you dive 111 feet to the bottom. Normal procedure, you lower all the platforms here, you go down the next lower level, lower all the platforms at that level, and string fishnet. In case some tools are dropped, they won't bounce off and puncture the side of the missile. Now the two mannequins that are dressed in rocket handlers' outfits, that's Charlene in the front part there with a portable detector wand. She's looking for an oxidizer leak. She's been looking for 8 years now, and we have high hopes she'll find it this year. The other gentleman is Charlie, and he's got a checklist. Everything is done by checklist down here. Nothing is left to chance or memory. Too much can go wrong. These sites were built at a cost of $8.3 million. The missiles cost $2.2 million. However, keep in mind, those are $1960.
Okay, you've entered a very special structure, and now at first glance it seems like I lied to you a little bit when I said everything launch sensitive is shock isolated. Of course, you don't see any of the individual components in here, like the commander's console, none of the cabinets, none of the lights are on springs. Look to your left, you'll see a huge spring. Over to your right, another huge spring. There are 8 of those springs radially around this entire 3-story structure, completely shock isolating it from its outside concrete and steel shell. When you walked into the room, you probably didn't notice that you walked across an 11-inch wide bridge. So the entire 3-story inner structure is completely isolated from its outside concrete and steel shell by that 11-inch rattle space. The whole building can move. Upstairs is crew's quarters. It's very small, it's very Spartan, it's adequate. Motel 6 is luxury by comparison. This, of course, is the command center. Downstairs is an equipment bay. It houses the termination for all of those antennas topside that John told you about. There's rectifiers down there, there's sanitation equipment, and there's 2 large batteries that I'll talk about. Now I'd like to go briefly around the room and explain some of the details to you. Large gray device over here is a blast lock valve. That's where the air comes in from topside. That's designed to close deliberately with only a 2 pound per square inch overpressure. If anything adverse was happening outside, that would automatically close for crew protection. Now, the entrance to the emergency escape hatch is directly downstairs from us. If the access portal didn't exist anymore, they would have to go downstairs right below us, open a steel door, crawl through a 9 or 10 foot long tunnel on their hands and knees, and then scurry up 47 feet of ladder to the surface. Now we come over to this red safe. This is the Emergency War Order Safe, or EWO safe, and in it are contained part of the top secret documents that would enable this crew to launch a missile if it ever became necessary. You'll see 2 locks on the safe. They are combination locks, and they are owned by the officers of each crew, and they do not know the combination to each other's lock. When you came downstairs, perhaps some of you saw on the side of the cabinet a sign that says you've entered a no-loan zone. What that means is if anybody had to go in back of these cabinets to do maintenance work or down a cableway or anywhere else, not one person could ever be by themselves. A second person always had to be with them and within eye-to-eye contact, both for safety and security. Because most everything that happens in here requires 2 inputs for 1 output, and that'll become obvious to you when we go through the launch procedure. Now these 3 cabinets on my left that I'm going by are the termination for all of the communications equipment on site. That is taken care of by the deputy commander who sits over here. The deputy commander is also in charge of security. If there were other personnel on site, they had to have with them handheld walkie-talkie radios. Whenever they changed their position, it was necessary for them to radio back into the deputy commander, so he could change their position with a grease pencil right on this locator board, which is a clear plastic overlay of the map of the area. It was necessary that they know where everybody was at all times. Over here is the control for the pop-up antennas that John showed you upstairs. You just dial a frequency you want right there, push a button, and the antenna would pop up to the dialed-in frequency. And this, of course, is the television set which is alive today for that closed-circuit camera in the entrapment area. And as you can see, the commander could see very well who was in there. Now, in addition to the 2 officers, there was 2 highly trained enlisted men on the crew, generally high-ranking sergeants. One was a facilities technician and the other was a missile technician. This large gray cabinet is something the facilities technician would monitor, and from my left hand on over, all these light green cabinets have to do with the missile, and that's what the missile technician would monitor. The facilities technician could monitor most everything he needed to on site, including the incoming electricity on the top. Well, the incoming electricity is pretty much the same as you and I would use at home, only from a commercial source, only here it came in at 480 volts and was rectified down to different voltages as required by different equipment, all the way down to 28 volts DC, because the missile operated on 28 volts DC. Well, you know, commercial power isn't always that reliable. It could go off due to storms, or somebody hit a pole with their car, and we could not be without power for 1 second down here. So there are 2 backup systems to it. On the 3rd level of the silo, there's a 510 horsepower generator that will come online within 60 seconds and provide 350 kilowatts of backup power. Well, that's still not really enough, because that takes 60 seconds and only takes 58 seconds to launch the missile. So backing that up, and I've already mentioned them briefly, there's 2 large batteries downstairs directly underneath us, 28 volts DC. They're always charged up. Each one of them is approximately the size of a Volkswagen Beetle. If necessary, they'd be able to launch their missile under battery power alone, if the other 2 systems didn't exist. If they were under battery power, the lights might be dim, but they'd still be able to accomplish their mission. Don't be alarmed at what you hear. That's what it sounds like down here when those tipsies topside are violated. If they had crews up there working, they could turn the areas off where they were, because they would just be continue to violate the system, and all violations had to be documented. And you know where they knew where most everybody was anyway on the locator board. Now we come to the missile fault locator, and this is where they would determine if they had a problem with the missile itself. If they did, to your right in the black cabinet is a complete set of technical manuals, and what you're looking at are the originals, and there's something in there for everything on this site. We now come over to the control monitor group. On the top it contains the very important code entry device that will unlock that valve on the top of stage 1 engine. We'll talk about that in a moment. And this is the launch procedure itself. And when we go through a simulated launch, you'll be able to follow through with this. And this launch procedure also contains targeting information. And that's right here by my left hand. All 54 of these sites were pre-programmed for 3 different targets. And the commander could change targets very easily by pushing buttons on his console. And I'm going to do that for you now, so you can see the targeting information change right there. Target 1, Target 2, and Target 3. I'm going to return to Target 2 since that was considered the primary target for this area. Incidentally, folks, I'm told that when they deactivated this site in 1983, someone came in here and peeled this little plastic overlay off of Target 2, and they found a little handwritten sticky note in there that said downtown Los Angeles. Power distribution controls for all 3 electrical systems, circuit breakers for the entire missile system, just like your home, and from my left hand on over is the missile guidance cabinet. This is what told the missile where it was and where it needed to go. Right now you'll see an awful lot of blank panels right there, in there now, 19 of them as a matter of fact. But these panels were filled when this system came online in 1963 because it represented late 50s and early 60s technology. I understand there was vacuum tubes in there as well as early transistors, and it was kind of a cumbersome, not too reliable internal-external guidance system. Around 1978, Delco Electronics and MIT got together with late 70s technology and completely modernized the entire guidance down to this size, and it was brought into a much more reliable internal guidance system. In today's digital technology, one can only wonder, perhaps about the size of a deck of cards or a pack of cigarettes. I mentioned 3 targets. The targets came in the form of a Mylar paper punched tape, 1 tape for each target. Now you cannot tell what the targets are from looking at the holes in the tape, and incidentally folks, the crews that worked here did not know what the targets were. We understand they really did not want to know what they were under the circumstances. If this tape had been altered, it would also be obvious to the naked eye that it had been altered. If it ever became necessary to change targets, and we understand it happened rather infrequently during the life of the system, Strategic Air Command under Armed Guard would bring in 1 new tape, perhaps 2, maybe 3 new tapes. They'd feed the tape into the tape reader. The new information would go into the computer on board the guidance section on stage 2 of the missile, and then come back over the signal data recorder and a 9-digit code that would confirm for the crew that the missile has received the correct information correctly. The commander could monitor everything on site. The bottom row lights, he could monitor the facility. The middle row lights, he could monitor the missile. Under my left hand is communications. I've told you about the 3 targets, and right here is the automatic launch procedure. Once this key is turned, there's no turning back. It's a die-in-the-wool position, and they cannot take it back. The only reason it would take back is in case the missile itself malfunctioned or something else malfunctioned. So, also in the safe are the launch keys themselves. The commander would take a key out and break a seal and put it in right over here. The deputy commander would do the same over here. You'll see, even if I was the world's tallest person, I couldn't reach and turn these keys at the same time. And I couldn't turn this key and then quick run over here and turn that key, because the keys had to be turned within 2 seconds of each other and held for 5 seconds in order to make it work. 2 inputs for 1 output. Are you ready to help me launch that missile, man? This works just like your car does. I'll play your deputy commander and count down for you. 4, 3, 2, 1, launch. Okay, you've done it. Thank you. Point of no return now. There's nothing else we can do with this missile. It's under its own power. Green light. It says launch enabled. That means that the correct code has been placed in up here that'll unlock that valve. Next light, batteries activated. On board the missile are dry charged batteries. Squids have fired, allowing electrolyte to flow into these batteries. In about 25 seconds, these batteries will be fully charged. The missile then will be under its own power and very shortly under its own guidance, completely separated from this room. When this next light comes on, you're going to hear those tipsies being violated again. That's because that silo closure door now is automatically coming open. And of course, the crew cannot see, feel, or hear it down here. Next light says silo soft, means the door is on its way to being fully open, and it's considered soft and vulnerable. Next light, guidance go. Everything else on board the missile is now beginning to happen. The hydrazine and the oxidizer are now beginning to flow towards the engine for ignition. And when we have ignition, this next light will come on. You're going to hear a klaxon sound, and you're going to see blinking red lights down here. That means the silo is on fire. And when this last light comes on, as it just did, the missile is gone. So in 30 to 35 minutes, target 2 is going to cease to exist. In one way, folks, it was deliberately created kind of dumb. It's not like the missiles that were fired out of Vandenberg Air Force Base or Cape Canaveral. These missiles did not have a destruct package on it, and once this missile has left this silo, we could not change its course. It's logical to assume that if we could do something with it, our adversaries could do something with it also, and we certainly didn't want it back.